Hey, what's up guys? Team Fusion here, back with another video. Now in today's video, I have my Elemental Hero Neos deck. If you couldn't tell by the playmat I have in all my videos, this is my favorite deck ever. I really love the concept of contact fusion, always a big fan of GX. Jaden's actually my favorite protagonist. Now, let's get right into the profile. Starting off, I of course run 3 of the main monster. Elemental Hero Neos, kind of one of your more important monsters in this deck, because he's the main material for all of your fusions, and I do mean all. I run 3 Neospace Connector. When he's summoned, you can special summon a Neos or Neospatian, and then you contribute him to summon a Neos or Neospatian from your graveyard, which is very useful. I run 3 copies of Elemental Hero Prisma, mainly because of his effect. You can reveal a fusion monster in your extra deck, send one of the materials to the graveyard, and he becomes that material. Really useful for if you want a Neos, but you don't have a Neos in your hand. Send one to the graveyard, he becomes your Neos. Now, starting up with the Neospatian lineup, I run 2 copies of Neospatian Grand Mole. Grand Mole's effect, when it attacks or is attacked, you can bounce them both, this monster and your opponent's, back to the hand. I'm pretty sure he was actually banned for the longest time because of how good he was. I run 2 copies of Neospatian Dark Panther. Basically, you can target a monster on your opponent's field, his name and effect becomes that. So, you know, your opponent has a monster with a really good effect in the field, summon him, take it. I run 2 Neospatian Aqua Dolphin. 2 of, because you don't really want to draw into him all the time. Not only you can discard a card and look at your opponent's hand, and if you have a monster with higher attack points than a monster in your opponent's hand, send that monster to the graveyard, your opponent takes damage. But, you know, you can also just get a look into your opponent's hand, which is always useful. See what they have. I run 2 copies of Keeper of Dragon Magic, specifically to search out the main fusion spell in this deck, Neos Fusion, which I'll get into that later. Discard a card, had a fusion spell or polymerization in your hand. I run 2 copies of Rainbow Dark Dragon. I'll get into why I use 2 of him later in the profile. And the last few one-ofs, I run 1 Flare Scarab, 1 Air Hummingbird, and 1 Glow Moss, specifically for the fusions. Now, getting into the fusion spell I run for Keeper of Dragon Magic, I run 3 Neos Fusion, probably the most important card in this deck by far. It's like your polymerization, but you get to fuse from the deck. You get to use materials from the deck. So, you can also use them from your hand or field, but let's be honest, you're going to want to use them from the deck. Not to mention, if your monster would be put back into the extra deck by its own effect, or destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish this from your graveyard instead, which is really, really nice. I run 3 Miracle Contact. They're Japanese copies because I couldn't afford English ones. So, fusion summon an Elemental Hero Neos fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your field or graveyard. I think also from your hand. Really useful. The materials actually get shuffled back into the deck, which is, you know, so you can use them again. I run 3 of the field spell, Neospace. Gives all of your Elemental Hero Neos and its fusion monsters 500 extra attack points, and makes the being shuffled back in the extra deck effect optional. So if you don't know, most of the Neos fusions have an effect where they get shuffled back into the extra deck at the end of the turn. This card stops that from happening, or it doesn't stop it, it just makes it optional. I run 3 Convert Contact. This is your draw power card for the deck. So if you control the monsters, send a Neospatial monster from your hand to the graveyard and 1 from your deck to the graveyard, and then draw 2 cards. This is not once per turn, so if you happen to draw into another Convert Contact and have another Neospatian in your hand, you can activate the second one. Alright, getting into the one-ofs of this deck. I run 1 Contact Gate, 1 Double Hero Attack, and 1 Generation Next. If your life points are less than your opponent's, you can either add to your hand or special summon one Elemental Hero or Neospatian monster from your deck, which comes in handy. Contact Gate allows you to banish 2 Neospatian monsters from your graveyard with different names, and then special summon 2 Neospatian monsters from your deck with different names, which does come in handy. And 1 Double Hero Attack. If you control a fusion monster that lists Elemental Hero Neos, you can special summon 1 Elemental Hero from your graveyard, or fusion monster from your graveyard, without summoning conditions, which is pretty useful at times. Now, the last 3 cards of the deck, I run just 3 copies of Next, a really good trap card for this deck. If you control no cards, you can activate from your hand first off. And as its regular effect, you can special summon any number of Neos or Neospatian monsters from your hand or graveyard with different names, which is really useful. The only, thing is that you can't summon monsters from the extra deck except fusion monsters, which is not the issue, because I only run fusion monsters in my extra deck. Speaking of said extra deck, let's get into it. I run 1 copy of Elemental Hero Cosmo Neos. Next helps me summon out this dude a lot. He requires 1 Elemental Hero Neos, and just 3 Neospatians with different attributes, which can be difficult without either Miracle Contact or Next. But when he's summoned, you can negate every card your opponent controls until the end of the turn, which is really, really useful. Not to mention, if he's shuffled back into the extra deck, you can destroy all cards your opponent controls during the same turn that your opponent's effects are negated, so he can't really do anything about it. Getting into some of the Neos/Neospatian monsters, I run 1 Aqua Neos, 1 Flare Neos, 1 Dark Neos, and 1 Grand Neos. I would run Air or Glow Neos if I had them, which I don't. Basically, like Grand Mole, you can target 1 monster your opponent controls, bounce it back to the hand. He gains 400 for each spell and trap on the field, which is really, really nice. Discard a card, your opponent randomly discards a card, really useful. And his effect, you can straight up negate the effects of a monster your opponent controls, which is really useful. And if you can't tell, he requires Neos and Grand Mole, he requires Neos and Flare Scarab, Neos and Dark Panther, Neos and Aqua Dolphin. Now, starting with the duo fusions that require Neos and 2 Neos fusions, or Spatians. 1 Nebula Neos, 1 Storm Neos, 1 Magma Neos, and 1 Chaos Neos. All 4 of these are really good, except for him. So he requires Neos, Flare Scarab, and Grand Mole. He straight up gains attack for each card on the field, which is really useful. He already has just 3,000 base. Pretty sure he gains 400 for each card on the field. And if he's shuffled back into the extra deck, return all cards in the field to the hand, which really useful. Storm Neos requires Neos, Aqua Dolphin, and Air Hummingbird. His effect, you can just destroy all spells and traps on the field, which is really nice. And if he's shuffled back into the extra deck, you can just straight up return every card to the deck, I think. Yeah, I'm back into the deck. Nebula Neos, really useful. Requires Neos, Dark Panther, and Grand Mole. When he's summoned, just draw 1 card for each card your opponent controls, which is really, really nice. And then you can negate the effects of a monster on the field, in your opponent's field. This is Chaos Neos. His effect is straight up just a gamble, which is why he's not that good. Also, he doesn't have a shuffle back in the extra deck effect, so he requires Neos, Glowmoss, and Dark Panther. Now, getting into the last few fusions, I run 2 copies of Rainbow Neos, which is why I run the Rainbow Dark Dragons in the deck. It requires Neos and a Rainbow Dragon or Rainbow Dark Dragon. He's the strongest fusion monster in this deck. You can either destroy a monster on your field, bounce all your opponent's monsters back, get rid of a spell or trap on your field, do the same but with their spells and traps, and you can banish a card from the graveyard Send one card from the top of your deck to the graveyard, shuffle all cards in your opponent's graveyard back into the deck. I never really use that effect. I usually just either bounce spells or traps or bounce monsters. Not to mention just 4,500 attack points. Plus Neo space, that's 5,000. Rounding up the extra deck, I run 1 Neos Knight, 1 Brave Neos, and unfortunately 1 Divine Neos. I never really go into him, so he's not too important, but he just requires a lot, which is why I don't often go into him. Brave Neos, really good card for this deck. If he destroys a monster in battle, you can either spell a trap that specifically lists Elemental Hero Neos, which is really useful. He requires Elemental Hero Neos and a level 4 lower effect monster. Elemental Hero Neos Knight just requires Elemental Hero Neos and another warrior. He gains half the attack points of the other warrior used to summon him. He can attack twice, but unfortunately he can't do battle damage, which is the one downside. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, I love this deck. It is my favorite.